My name is Nguyen. I'm co-founder of Affluence, the company behind Matrix. Today's webinar is on how to successfully prioritize your tasks, projects, and emails. What I want to start with is a quote that's inspired me over the last several months, and it's from Tony Robbins, and it's that productivity is not just about time management, it's about misplaced attention. And so one of the reasons why I bring this up is because, it's really affected me quite a bit. I have 1,000 things I want to do, but really I don't have the resources to do them all. And so every single day I struggle not with just how to spend my time, but what to spend my time on. And so I can do a lot of things right, but the question is, am I working on the right things? And so when people think about productivity and when people think about how to become more effective and more efficient and so forth, one of the recurring themes that I've seen is that people end up spending so much time on the wrong things. And so you're, literally shifting your focus to work on things that don't matter. And so when we think about using a software to actually help us prioritize or help us focus on our work, the key around here is that to make sure that we actually put our attentions on the things that matter most. So one of the reasons why you're probably here today is to learn how Matrix can help you with some of these aspects of prioritizing your time, prioritizing your attention. And so at the highest level, Matrix is a comprehensive email project and priority management software. And we help in three different ways. The first is at the individual level, we help you prioritize your task and emails. And to me, with everything that we do, this is the single most important thing. If we can help you as an individual be successful, be able to focus on the work that matters, then everything else would fall into place. What happens though is that Matrix has a lot of capabilities around sharing your priorities with your coworkers and your teammates and your managers and so forth. And so what happens over time is that as you use Matrix, you actually become more aligned with your team members and ensuring that everyone's actually working on the right things. And then lastly, as you use Matrix more across the whole organization, you actually end up creating what's called a single source of truth to ensure that everyone's on the same page. Now, one of the key takeaways that I want you to have from today's webinar is that you don't have to be ambitious from the beginning. There's just 1,000 ways to use Matrix. So I'll try my best to help you hone in on the core capabilities that will give you the biggest impact. So I strongly believe in the Pareto rule. So the 20% of the features that will give you 80% of the value. And hopefully in today's webinar, I'll be able to help you identify those features that will give you the biggest impact. Now let's talk about the fundamental concept behind Matrix. There's a quote attributed to former President Eisenhower: "What is important is seldom urgent, and what is urgent is seldom important." Now, what I really like about this quote is that it helps us understand that things are not linear. Now, let me explain. Let's just say if I ask you, what are the 15 things you have to do right now? Okay, take out a piece of paper, write down those 15 things. And then I'm going to ask you, what are you going to work on first? Are you going to work on the first thing that came to your mind, which is at the top of your list? Or are you going to work on that last thing you just wrote down, right? Do you go from the bottom up or top down? Or do you work on something random in the middle? And so as you can see, when we just write out our to-do list and we have it in a list, it's very, very difficult to decide how we should actually work on it. And so the strategy here is simple. For every single one of your tasks, ask the question, is this task important and is it urgent? And so what happens is that instead of actually a list, you end up with what's called the Eisenhower Matrix. So it's 4 distinct buckets. Your important and urgent task, that goes in high priority. That's quadrant 1. Your important but not urgent task, that goes into the medium priority. That's quadrant 2. Your urgent but not important tasks are actually low priority and they go in quadrant 3. And then lastly, you shouldn't have anything that's not important and not urgent. Therefore, you sort of have used quadrant 4 as sort of your catch-all, your bucket, where you're putting in all the tasks that you have, and then before you decide on where they go. Now, what's really magical about the Eisenhower Matrix is that it really helps us focus on where we should spend our time. So as an example, let's just say you have those 15 things and you go to your, you open your computer at the start of the week and you open up your party matrix, you're looking at your Eisenhower matrix of all the tasks that you have, and you're like, you know what? I have these three things in quadrant one. That's where I should be spending my time, right? I'm not going to mess around with the things in quadrant three, and I'm definitely not going to do anything in quadrant four. So going back to that list that I mentioned to you, imagine you have those 15 things you have to do. What if you ask your coworkers to do the exact same exercise? What if they come up with the exact same 15 items as you do? But when they put it into the Eisenhower matrix, suddenly some of the tasks that you have in high priority is in their medium priority, or some of the stuff that you have in your low priority is in their high priority. And as you can see, when we have two lists and we compare those 15 items with each other, yeah, we're all on the same page. Oh, yeah, I know these are the 15 things you have to do. But when you do it in the format of the Eisenhower matrix, that's when you get all the interesting discussions with each other and realize that, wait a minute, maybe we're not all on the same page. And so what happens is that the magic of the Eisenhower matrix is from the fact that you have to prioritize from the beginning. So instead of writing down those action items in the to-do list, you actually should be putting them into the 2x2 matrix, and then you can start comparing. And also, it is extremely hard. I want to tell you that, putting tasks into the matrix and deciding where they go is not something that's easy. In fact, it's something that I continue to struggle with all the time, mostly because, when you have something new or when you have something that's exciting, you tend to prioritize them over everything else. So you have to make that conscious decision of, wait a minute, I should prioritize this, I shouldn't prioritize this, and so forth. So if you find that you're spending a lot of time prioritizing and you're spending that time deciding what to do, then you're using Party Matrix the right way. And then the second thing is that success from using Matrix isn't from finding out what everyone agrees on, it's discovering disagreements on what should be a priority when it isn't. So if you ever go into a meeting and you have your Matrix open and you're comparing each other's priorities and you're discovering all these disagreements that you have that you weren't aware of before, that's when you know you're using our software the right way. So keep that in the back of your mind, okay? I think sometimes people, when they use software or they use a task management software or project management software, they're just trying to make sure that everyone sees the same task and so forth. My argument is that 90% of the time you're probably aligned anyways. It's about discovering the disagreements. That's where all the value of the system comes from. Now, I want to share with you a couple of insights before we jump into the applications. Having talked to thousands of customers over the years and seen Party Matrix used in almost every single imaginable scenario. The first is the following: if everything's important, then nothing's important. Now, I say that because what happens is if you're a manager and you and your coworkers are working together in Party Matrix and you have a new task and you assign it to your direct report and you immediately put in quadrant one. And then 2 days later, you have something new and again, it goes in quadrant one, right? What happens is that if you do that, then guess what? You're actually not really making critical decisions. Instead, you're constantly shifting everyone into a firefighting mode, and they're constantly changing their focus. They're not working on the right things. So I want to advise that if you ever find yourself putting everything in quadrant one from the get-go, step back and make sure that if you put something in quadrant one, you might have to take something out. So on the contrary, if you're a individual contributor and your manager is constantly pushing things on you in the quadrant one, then push back and say, hey, I'm okay taking this on as a quadrant one, but what are we deprioritizing? So I really emphasize this because, I think over and over again, I've seen so many people put things in quadrant one, and then all they've done is they shift one long list, right, from their that 15 items in the to-do list. Now it's 15 items in quadrant one. That becomes meaningless in itself. The second thing is that important tasks should always have due dates and clear ownership. So my recommendation is that if you have something that's important and urgent, then you should have a due date. And I've seen people make the argument that, oh yeah, I don't know exactly when this is due, so therefore I don't want to set a due date yet. My advice: set a due date. You can always change it, but you cannot go and prioritize and say that something's important and urgent if there's no clear dates on it. And then not only that, what happens is that when we don't set dates, everything else will sort of grow and consume up all our time. So what happens is that, I've never seen a time where I'm like, oh, you know what? I have absolutely nothing to do, right? And so instead, there's always like something that will fill up that vacuum. So therefore, you should always have due dates on those most important tasks. So that's a way to ensure that it's on top of your mind. The third thing is don't track everything, track what matters most. And this is actually important for new users of Matrix. Now, for me, I have several hundred projects. I have tens of thousands of tasks, but that's because I've been using Matrix for a while, and I can sort of manage all of that. But in reality, for the vast majority of people, and for most of you who's listening to this right now, is that if you try to track everything, you're going to be overwhelmed. And so instead, in Matrix, I recommend that you start by just focusing on the tasks that are truly important, decisions that you have to make. There was a couple of months ago, I was talking to a customer, and one of their first question was, "Hey, how can I dump my tens of thousands of emails into Matrix?" And my immediate response is, "This is an absolutely terrible idea." And the reason is simple. When you have tens of thousands of emails, you clearly are not prioritizing them, right? And so now you have one system of unprioritized work. If you're dumping them into a matrix, all you're doing is you're taking from one system that dumps to another, and now you have a lot of items in matrix that itself is also not prioritized. So therefore, in general, my recommendation is focus on the 20, 30 tasks that are going to have the most impact for you this week, this month, whatever it is, and then only prioritize those until you have really good grasp on how you should be spending your time. And then similarly, when we talk about emails, it's the same thing. All of us have massive inboxes with thousands of emails. If you take every single email and you put it into a matrix, guess what? That's not going to help you. So instead, always focus on the most important emails where you need to make sure that you get answered, or you need to make sure that someone needs to be responsible for it, delegate it, etc. So only prioritize your most important emails. The fifth thing is that Matrix is a communication tool. And it's actually really interesting that I bring this up because earlier I told you Matrix is a task, project, and email prioritization software, right? But at the same time, when I call it the communication tool, the reason I call it communication tool is because it helps you communicate your priorities to everybody else. The analogy that I have is actually pretty simple. Imagine if you have a floating matrix above your head and it shows you your priorities. It shows everyone your priorities, rather. And then all your coworkers also have a floating matrix above their head, and it shows you their priorities. And then when you walk around the office and you're looking at each other's matrix, suddenly you're on the same page, or you start realizing all the things you're not aligned on, right? You're going to say, oh, wait, I see how, 14 of these 15 things we're on the same page with, but there's this one important task that somehow is not at the top of your list, et cetera, right? And so when you think about it from that perspective, really just look at Matrix as a way to help you tell everybody else what you think are the most important things. And so um, you might have disagreement, and that's a good thing. If you have disagreement using Matrix, it means you're using it the right way. And then the last thing is that I think it's actually very important for you to prioritize everything that needs to be prioritized. And so let me phrase it in a slightly different way. What happens is that in an organization, there'll be plenty of times where people think that they're on the same page when it comes to really, really important goals or really, really important priorities. And so people assume that everyone else is on the same page as them. But what happens is that in reality, there are many times where this is not so clear. So therefore, my recommendation to you is if you're planning on using Matrix across an organization, or if you're in a leadership position, make sure you write down those priorities and put them into the various quadrants. And even if they're wrong, that's okay, because it'll start a conversation with your coworkers. So therefore, just the fact that you have a priority down, and even if it's wrong initially, that's still better than assuming that everyone else is on the same page as you. I do want to mention that this webinar, the recording will be on our website, and then also we have other webinars as well that's been recorded in the past. Now with that, let's actually jump into the product and help you put this into practice. Okay, so my goal today is to show you the features in Party Matrix that will give you the biggest impact, right? There's 1,000 things you can do, but you don't need to learn all of it. So I'll try my best to give you a high level overview. And then hopefully over time, you'll be able to go and explore and learn and adapt the system to your needs. So let me give you an overview of the structure. On the left-hand side are project. So what is a project? A project in Party Matrix is essentially a matrix. So every project has its own four quadrants. And so, for example, here, I selected a project called My Personal Priorities, and now I have the 4 quadrants front and center. If I need to create a task, I simply click on Add Item here, and I would say, for example, follow up with webinar participants, okay? And then I'll go ahead and say due tomorrow, 2 p.m. So with Party Matrix, it actually processes the natural language for me. So set the due date for tomorrow, 2 p.m. my local time. If you use Party Matrix and you say due tomorrow, 2 p.m., it'll set it to your local time. So as you can see, it's very, very easy to create a task. And so one of the things I recommend right from the beginning is that when you create a task, set that due date. And so set the due date in the task name because it'll save you an additional step of having to click on a calendar or anything like that. Now, when I select this task, on the right-hand side, I get what's called the item details. And so the item details is where I can add additional information around the task, but there's a couple of things I want to highlight to you. Is ownership. So what happens is that the owner of a task gets their avatar shown here. If I need to delegate this, I simply click on the owner and delegate to another person. And so now suddenly Eugenia is the owner of this task and I'm a follower of this task. And so what that means is I'll get updates should this task, or I'll get notifications should this task get updated. Now, next I have progress, efforts, reminders, and dates. Now, we already talked about due dates, right? Due dates is when something is due. But now I want to tell you something about the reminder, which is, I think, one of the other important features in Party Matrix. Let me explain the difference. Let's just say you have a task that's due next Friday. But that task is going to take you 3 days to get done. So if you set a due date for next Friday, and then next Friday comes around, and suddenly you realize, wait a minute, I haven't started yet. So how can I get this done? And you can't. So what happens is that it's not because you kind of ignore the task, it's because you have so many other things that's vying for your attention, right? And so one of the strategies around that is to actually set reminders on a recurring basis to ensure that you actually remember to get started. So what I like to do is on the bottom here in the chat section of the task, I would say remind me daily. And so now I'll get a daily reminder to work on this task until it is done, even if it's past the due date. And that's a very important distinction. What happens is that if something has a due date, it's on your calendar. But if it's on your calendar, at first you're thinking about it because it's coming up. But then the moment the due date passes, now that task is behind you, right? And so when that task is behind you, you think about it less and less and less, and then at some point you forget about it completely. And if this resonates with you, is because you're not the only person that face this particular problem. This happens to me 1,000 times as well. What happens is I have a lot of tasks, a lot of different due dates, and we just have so many things on our plate that it's not like we're trying to ignore it. It's just that we just have everything else that's vying for our attention, and therefore we start forgetting all the things that are past due. And so if you look at a lot of people's to-do list, there's a lot of tasks that are not marked as done. It's because it's in the past. So my recommendation is always set a recurring reminder to make sure that you work on this task, even if it's overdue. So one of the things I like to do is I would, if I have to contact a customer, I would always set a due date for 1 month from now, and then set a recurring monthly reminder. And that ensures that I will never forget to work on that task. So on the right-hand side as well, down here we have the chats. The chat is where you can communicate with other people who might be in this task. So if you use Party Matrix on an individual basis, the chat here won't be that important for you to communicate with others. Instead, it serves as a history of all the changes that you made to this task. But if you happen to collaborate with other people, this is the one place where you can communicate, you can ask questions, and so forth and so forth. Then in the notes sections is where you can add basic notes around this task. Now, one of the things that I think is pretty useful here is the ability for you to add subtasks. So for example, if your task may have 2 or 3 different subtasks, I can go ahead and do subtask 1, subtask 2, subtask 3 here. And so now what happens is when I do that, I would create different subtasks in Matrix. And then as I mark those subtasks as done, the progress bar will update accordingly. And then to the right of that is resources. And so resources where you attach documents, links, and so forth, but also emails. So speaking of emails, let me switch gear a little bit and talk about email prioritization, which is probably the #1 reason why customers come to Matrix. So when I go to the Outlook here, for example, so if you have Microsoft Outlook, you can install what's called the Matrix Outlook integrations, which allows you to convert an email into a task. Let me give you an example use case. Let's just say you get an important email and you need to respond to this email, but you can't respond to this email today. So what do? If you're like most people, you flag the email, you leave it as unread, and then in some ways you hope that you'll remember. And then if you have 5 flag emails, maybe that's okay. But if you have 50 flag emails, then what happens, right? And so that's a challenge that a lot of us face, is that we end up with so many flag emails, so many unread emails, that again, we start to lose track of everything we have to do. That becomes that long list of unprioritized emails. So by using Matrix for Outlook, you can go to apps here, click on Matrix, turn emails into tasks. And if you don't have this yet, click on add apps and then search for Matrix, turn emails into tasks. And when I click on that option, I can choose prioritize email. And what this does is it actually takes the email and creates a task from it. And you can choose what project it goes in, what quadrant it goes in. So imagine if this email is very important, I'll go ahead and put in quadrant 1. And then after that, I can go and assign it to somebody if needed. And then lastly, I can also set a due date. So now I'll set a due date a week from now, and I'll click capture email. So as you can see, I converted this email into a task. I have a due date associated with it. I delegate it to a person. And then not only that, this person will actually get the notification that this email is due. They can actually go to the resources and open the email file and respond to that email if needed. And so in this particular case, instead of just flagging the emails as unread, I'm actually actively converting the email into a task. I've prioritized it into the appropriate quadrants. I have a very well-defined due date. I can even set a recurring reminder if needed, right? So I'll say remind me on weekdays. And so now what happens is that I have a reminder here to make sure that I answer this email in a timely manner. So this is a very effective way to ensure that your most important emails are never forgotten. So if you have Outlook, this is a strong recommendation that I make, that you should install this to make sure that your most important emails are captured. Now, what happens too with Matrix is that you can also attach an email to an existing task. So let's say you're working with a customer and the customer sends a follow-up email. You already have a task. What you can do is you can open here, click Matrix again, choose Open Matrix, and now you can search for that task. And then instead of actually creating a new task from the email, you can attach this email to an existing task instead. So this is a very useful way to actually turn those emails into tasks and then take them out of your inbox, and you don't have to rely on the unread system or just simply flagging them. And then not only that, when you do prioritize those emails in Outlook, it will show that it has been prioritized in Matrix through this tag right here. Now let's go back to Matrix. As you can see, I go back here. That task from the email is immediately uploaded to my project, and then I can click on here, and as you can see, it shows me exactly who's it's assigned to, when it's due, there's a reminders, and then in the resources section, the email file, which is the email file itself, is attached. So my coworker can open this, respond to the email, and the nice thing is when that task is done, when my coworkers responded, they update this task, and now I know that that email has been responded to. If I had forwarded this email, I wouldn't know if my coworker's seen it. I wouldn't know if if it's done, if they've responded to the customer, and then also they wouldn't know when it's due and they wouldn't know what the priorities are. So that's a huge distinction between simply forwarding an email to somebody versus prioritizing it in Matrix. Okay, so what I've shown you so far is the list of projects, the quadrants, and then the item details, and how to prioritize emails. Let's talk about some of the concepts around projects and what are the kind of projects you should create. One of the things I want to emphasize is don't be afraid to create multiple projects. In fact, you can always think of when you as the criteria for creating a new project is essentially whether or not the list of priorities within each of those projects are different from all the other projects, right? So as an example, let's say if you are a manufacturing plant manager and you're managing 5 different plants. Well, each of those plants should have its own project because they have distinct priorities. Similarly, if you're a business owner, you should have a project for sales and marketing. You should have a project for operations. You should have a project for customer support and so on, because they shouldn't be all mixed together. One of the nice things about Matrix is that you can go and you can actually aggregate projects on demand, and Matrix can actually tie all these things together and give you all the reports and all the perspective as needed. Therefore, it's up to you to go ahead and prioritize those projects, or I'm sorry, to go ahead and create those projects for each of those contexts that you work with. So to create a project is actually very simple. Click on projects, choose create project. Now you can always create what's called a blank project. If you choose a blank project, you simply type in your project name. You can choose a color if needed, right? So I can do task project, for example, and then I can choose a color if needed and click add. That's pretty much it. I can choose from a basic list of basic templates. And what this does is actually changes the name of the projects based on different use cases. So for vast majority of you, I recommend just start with the basic Matrix. It's good enough to help you prioritize what you need to prioritize. And then also, if you use Matrix in the team, you can actually build different departments and groups and so forth. You can associate a project to the group, and that would help everyone essentially get access to the same project. But for most of you today, just go ahead, go into Matrix, create a blank project. And my first recommendation is to create a project called Personal Priorities. Then this is the place where you can just write down the tasks that you have just as a brain dump to take everything that's out of your brain and put it down and start prioritizing that. Now, the second thing you can do in Matrix is create a project from public templates. So we actually have generated more than 1,000 different templates that you can use completely free to organize your tasks in various different ways. So for example, you could do 30, 60, 90-day plan. This is a way for a manager, instead of actually prioritizing using the Eisenhower Matrix, you can go ahead and say each quadrant represents the tasks I have to do this month, next month, and the month after for every single quarter. So it's a very good way to actually plan on a quarterly basis. And then, of course, you can also create your own templates, which is very useful if you have a recurring work. So, for example, if you have an employee onboarding process or a client onboarding process, Matrix let you save templates. And when you launch a project from templates, it actually copies all the tasks from your previous templates over. And so that saves you a lot of time and effort in recreating the tasks over and over again. And then the last really useful way is to import from CSV. Matrix has a powerful way for you to export your task into CSV and then import your task from CSV. So unlike a lot of other task management software where, if you ever use Microsoft Planner or whatever, it's very, very difficult to get the tasks out. You just end up with this black box where it just absorbs all the tasks and you don't have any good way to extract them. The opposite happens with Matrix. You can export all your tasks into CSV, or you can import tasks through CSV into your Matrix system. So that's one thing I want to bring up because, for many of you, very important because you want to make sure that your data is portable and it goes with you wherever it is that you go. So the second project I strongly encourage many of you to make is actually a team project. And so the way it works with the team project is that if you're a manager, make sure you create a project and invite your coworkers to it. And so the reason is simple. When you're in a team meeting, simply project the project onto the screen, right? So you could share it. If you're in remote call, share it on your screen, or if you're in the same office, the same conference room, project it onto onto the screen so then everyone can look at it and be on the same page. And what happens is I simply go create a project and call it a team priority project, and then you call it weekly staff meeting. And then in your weekly staff meeting project, you select the project. On the right-hand side, you have what's called the project details. In the project details, members and click on plus and then invite your team members. So essentially, if you manage a team of 5, go to here, invite those 5 team members, and now everyone who's in this project will be able to see all the priorities that's shared together. And the reason why this is so useful is because it helps you be on the same page. Let me give an example. How many times have you been in a meeting, and in the meeting, everyone's talking about all the stuff that they're supposed to work on, and then also, note down some of the things you're going to work on next time and so forth. Then 2 weeks later, you come back and you're like, hey, by the way, did you work on that thing you said you work on 2 weeks? And then the person says, oh, I forgot to write it down, right? Or, oh, I didn't get to it. I didn't know when that was due, right? And so therefore, what happens is that when you share this project onto the screen with everybody, and when you come up with action items, you simply create the task right then, assign it to the person with the due date, and then guess what? When they go back to their desk, this information is synced to them. And if they have Matrix connected to Microsoft Teams, it'll send them a Teams notification to remind them that they need to work on that task before the next meeting. So what this allows you to do is to ensure that everyone's on the same page and also sort of take out all the excuses that people have. Now, the second use case with the weekly staff meeting project is the following. It helps everyone focus on the most important task. Let me give you another example. One of the challenges I see all over and over again is what I call recency bias. And the following things happen. You're in your weekly staff meeting and you're doing your project updates, right? Everybody else on the things that they've been working on or the things that are high priorities and so forth. But what happens is that people tend to talk about the things that just happened either that morning or yesterday or whatever it is, right? They don't talk about the most important task. They talk about the things that's top of mind. And top of mind tend to be the things that have just happened. So therefore, by using Matrix and having this weekly staff meeting project and prioritizing all your work into the quadrants, you want to make sure that people give a status update on everything that's in quadrant 1 and quadrant 2. Don't let that recency bias essentially overtake your meetings and you end up talking about the things that don't matter. And so sometimes, one of the best practices I've seen is to make sure that if we have something that's important, we always talk about it, even if it is not due, even if there's been no changes to it. And that just ensures that everyone else is on the same page. Again, when they go back to their desk, they know that they've talked about those most important tasks. I can't emphasize this enough because I feel like this is the single most powerful way for you to use the Eisenhower Matrix in a team environment. Now, again, on the right-hand side, in the project details, there's a couple of other things you can do. The first is you can actually change these quadrant names. And so sometimes, the high priority or the quadrant or the Eisenhower matrix doesn't work for everybody. So therefore, you can actually just click on this and change the quadrant name. You can also click on this right here to change the color. Now, the colors don't really affect the functionality in Matrix, but what it does is it sort of helps you organize, different types of tasks or different types of projects with the various colors. Now, on the top right, there's a couple of things you can do. If you click on this top right menu here, as you can see, there's a lot of choices, but there's a few things I want to share with you. The first is you can actually restrict and unrestrict projects. So if you plan to use Matrix in a big team, and you have a lot of tasks that you're delegating with each other, you can restrict to sure that you can only delegate tasks to the people within that project. So in an HR, if you're an HR, make sure you turn on this project so you don't accidentally create a task and share it with external people. This is where you can save the project as a template. So if you create a project and you have 15 tasks, and guess what? You need to duplicate these 15 tasks over and over again. Simply save it as a template. And now when you launch a project from that template, Matrix will copy all those tasks and then automatically set the due dates for you. So it's very, very useful and will save you a bunch of time and effort. And then the other thing I want to share with you is this concept of the export and import from CSV that I mentioned to you earlier. So if you ever want essentially a full export of all the tasks you have in a project, simply export as CSV and then import it as needed. So we talk about the matrix quite a bit. And so the matrix is the primary view in Matrix. However, you can also look at the tasks that you have using other views. So if you go to the top here, you actually have several options. The next one is called the list view. The list view shows all these tasks in a list, and it's very easy to actually sort. So you can sort by created date, you can sort by modified date or by due dates, etc. Now, as you can see, actually I can star a task. And when I star a task right here, it goes to the top of the list. So my recommendation is if you have a project and you have a lot of tasks, you can star the ones that are most important, but don't star more than 5 to 10 tasks in any projects. Again, the concept of if everything's important is if everything's important and urgent, then nothing's important and urgent, right? So if everything is starred, then nothing is starred. So just keep that in mind. And so when you're here as well, one of the things you can do is actually this really neat feature, which is you can go to this drop down, you can select the task, and then guess what? You can actually go click on share and choose email items. And what Matrix does is it actually launches your Outlook and build an email report for you. So as you can see, I actually built an email report here. And so if I ever need to share information with other people, I can simply do this and I can send it to my manager, I can send it to my clients, whatever it is that I need to do. That feature, and you can actually combine that with all our other filters and so forth to generate exactly the report that you need. Then up here, you also have the Kanban view. So for project managers, imagine if you have a project, a construction project. With a construction project, right, you might have all these tasks. And guess what? You have to get every single one of them done. And so what happens is you have all these to do. You can go ahead and move them over to in progress, or if something's done, you can drag over to done. And so this is a very easy way to make sure that everything from the left column is ultimately moved over to the right column. So it's a very good checklist view of tasks that you have. Then you have the calendar view and you have the timeline view. The timeline view is the Gantt chart view. Now let me explain the difference between the Gantt chart and the timeline and the calendar. The calendar is very good for seeing tasks that are due, this week or today or whatever. But if you have things that span across months or years, the calendar is just not sufficient. So you can go to the timeline view here and you see how I can zoom out, and actually I can see these tasks that span across multiple months. In fact, I can keep zooming out and I can see it span over the course of multiple years. So if you're working on a construction project or you're doing something that essentially involves a lot of people, a lot of resources over a long period of time, the Gantt chart view will generate that view for you. One thing that's nice about this is you can download it or you can copy and paste it into your PowerPoint presentation. Now, as you can see, I'm showing you these different views, but I didn't have to do anything special, right? All I did was create the task in the matrix, and then from there, I can go to these various views to get whatever information that I need. Now, one of the things that you notice on my left-hand side here is I have pin projects, star projects, and then essentially a list of regular projects. So when you first use Matrix, guess what? You don't have to worry about any of those. If you have 5 projects, you'll just see them here. But as you have more and more projects, then you want to be able to organize that information. So what you can do is you simply right-click on a project, and then you can choose to pin a project. So when you pin a project, it pins it for you personally. It puts at the top of your list. So for me, for example, I want to pin my personal project. I want to pin my goals for 2025. These are my personal things, right? And then for projects for my team that I want everyone to know that are important, then I would star the project. And so to star a project, essentially you select the project, and then on the right-hand side here, you click on the star button. And so that's a way to put at the top of everyone's list. So pin project goes at the top, and then star projects, and then everything else is sorted by when they were last modified. So if you have a lot of projects, Matrix will still let you organize that in a very efficient manner. But if you have 50 tasks, right, it's pretty easy to browse through Matrix. But if you have 500 tasks, it's a lot harder. So I'm going to show you something called the one-on-one view. So this is a very unique feature in Matrix, and I really haven't seen this executed really well anywhere else. But you can go to the one-on-one view, and instead of browsing through projects, you look at people. So this is a people-first view, and it helps you identify all the things you have in common with your coworker. So if you're a manager, one of the things that's so useful about this view is that it makes your one-on-one meeting so much more efficient. So for example, if I need to do a one-on-one with Remy, I go to one-on-one, I select Remy. Now, guess what? This information is all the tasks that Remy and I have in common across all of Matrix. I don't have to click through a project. I don't have to browse through every quadrant. I don't have to do any searches. Matrix does that for me automatically. Now, one thing that's nice about this too is I can go and click on filters, and then I can say group by projects. And so now I can see all the tasks that Remy and I have across all these different projects, right? And then not only that, I can click on due here, and I can sort it by due dates. The reason why I want to sort by due dates is then when I have a conversation with my coworker, we can focus on those things that are overdue. And maybe they're already done, but guess what? Sometimes people don't go and make those status updates. They don't go and actively manage their tasks or prioritize their tasks. And by using the one-on-one view, you can actually focus on all those critical tasks. And then not only that, if I need to, I can actually click on add share task here and automatically create a task that assigns to Remy and adds me as a follower. The reason why this exists is because, the last thing I want you to do is you have to open a project, you have to create a task, you have to assign it to your coworker, you have to set a due date. So just think about that. That's like 4 different clicks. So instead, you just click on add share task, type in the task name, and then you can use that natural language to say due in 1 week or due in 2 days or whatever it is. And you click add, and that's it. That's all you have to do. So in your one-on-one meetings, this will save you a lot of time and effort. And then again, also, it helps ensure that you talk through all those most important tasks. In fact, if you want to go and say, you know what, show me only the things in quadrant 1, you again click on filters and then go to here, and then as you can see, I can actually sort by all these other states as well, right? And so I can actually see exactly what task with what search filter, what state, finished or unfinished, and then all these other filters such as modification dates, due dates, and so forth. And then for me, what I can do is I can sort by quadrants on the top left right here. Now, one other feature that's actually you can do that's similar to the list view is click on this drop down, and you can again select multiple items at a time and click on this drop down again, and you can do multiple things. One, you can email the item, or two, you can mark the items as completed, or three, you can actually change the dates in bulk. So this is pretty useful, especially you have a lot of things that are overdue, then you can actually make those changes in a very, very efficient manner. So that's the one-on-one view. I highly recommend playing with it, especially if you are a manager and you work with a lot of coworkers. This is such a powerful way to jump back and forth between everybody without having to manually navigate through the projects. Then you have the global calendar view. So I showed you the calendar view earlier for a project. Well, Matrix has what's called global views, which actually aggregate across multiple projects. So when I click on this calendar view here, you can see that I can choose projects. I can choose what projects I want to see, and Matrix will show me the calendar of everything that I have. And then I can again combine it with the filter section, and I can say, show me the calendar for all the things that are in quadrant 1, right? So if you ever need to go and say, you know what, I need to know what are all the most important tasks across all of Matrix and put that on the calendar for me, that's exactly how you do it. And then you have what's called the search view. The search view shows you all the tasks, again, that you have across all the Matrix. One thing that's useful here is you can find all the things that are overdue. So simply click on that. And then not only that, you can click on filters again. You can choose specific people. You can choose specific quadrants and get all the information that you need to help you ensure that all your critical tasks are not dropped. Then you have the global Gantt chart, and it does the exact same thing. But one thing that's really useful about the global Gantt chart here is resource management. So imagine if you have a coworker and that coworker is heavily dependent on, well, Matrix will show you how heavily dependent on that person is. And you go to the global Gantt chart here, then you can select a person And again, to do that, you simply click on filters. You can select anybody that's in your organization. And now you can actually see that person's calendar and all the stuff that they have over the next month, quarter, or year, whatever it may be. Okay, so let's try to tie this back up because I really want to emphasize what are the things you should do today with Matrix. First, you should create a project for your personal task, right? That's important. So my personal priorities is one of the projects you should create. The second is your weekly staff meeting. That's just a way for you to communicate with your coworkers. It'll help everyone be on the same page. Then when you have those two projects, make sure you just write down all your tasks. And if you have important tasks, make sure you set the due dates and make sure you set a recurring reminder. And then what happens is that on a daily basis, what you should do is you go to the home view. So the home view tells you all the things that requires your attention. So now that you've set up these projects and you've set up these due dates and you're working with others, the home view tells you where you should spend your time today. So what happens is you see this number 47 here, it represents 47 alerts. This means these are all the items that require your attention. So it could be items that are now overdue, or reminders that you've set, or things that were assigned to you, or things where people mentioned you. So as you can see here, when I go to alerts, I can actually there's a little button and it shows me assign. And also on the top left here, it says new assignments. These are tasks that requires my attention because someone assigned me a task. So when you use Matrix and you use it in a collaborative environment, make sure that you always go to the new assignments here and make sure that you take a look at these tasks to see the things that people have assigned to you. And then, of course, as I look at these tasks, I can click through them and then the alerts will go away. Or if I need to, I can go to the top right here and clear my alerts as needed. And then the second thing I want you to learn to use from the home view is called the agenda. So when you go to the agenda, you actually get to see all the tasks that are due today or due this week and in the coming week. Now, there's two things you can do. At the top right here, you can choose items I own or items I follow. So if you are an individual contributor, or if you're using Matrix mostly for yourself, then you want to go and choose items I own, right? These are all the items that you have that's on your plate that you got to work on today, this week, etc. So that's your agenda. But if you're a manager and you assign a lot of tasks to other people, then you want to choose items I follow. This will show you the tasks of your coworkers whom you've assigned tasks to. So it's actually very, very useful because, in fact, I talked to a customer just this morning where they're managing, I guess, maybe 100 or more people. And what happens is they need to know what are the things that they have to work on, but then also what are the things that the coworkers are working on, and what are the things that are overdue. So by going to the items I follow, you get that complete perspective in a very easy and efficient manner. And then you can click on the task here. You can write a comment. You say, hey, by the way, did you work on this or whatever it is? Or you can change the due dates, etc., all from this view. So one thing that I want to emphasize to you is, the project list, like clicking through a project, is a very small portion of Matrix. You can use Matrix through all the various views and so forth, and it still allows you to focus on the most critical tasks that you have. So your job when you use Matrix is really to ensure that you write down your most critical priorities and that you organize them into the quadrants. And so then the system will take care of sort of everything else and get those things done. Now, one thing I want to say too is if you happen to use Microsoft Teams, you can install Matrix in Microsoft Teams. And in fact, if I go to Microsoft Teams right here, I have access to the entire application, Matrix application directly in Teams. You simply click on apps and install it. And then what's nice about this is if you have Microsoft Teams, you can go to a chat and you can go to a chat with a coworker, then click on this add a tab and simply choose Matrix, and you can add a one-on-one view directly here inside Teams. So I'll show you how that looks right here. So you can see how I can actually add this one-on-one for each of my coworkers inside Teams, and it allows me to see all the tasks I have in common with them without even going to Matrix. So this is very useful if you're a manager and you have a lot of direct reports and you want to know exactly what they're working on. You can actually just go to this one-on-one view for each of the people that you have a conversation with. And then you can add shared tasks directly from here as well. Okay, so with that, let me jump back to the presentation and try to wrap this up. So a couple of tips to shortcut your success. The first is if you're a manager, create a project for your team staff meeting and screen share it, right? We talk about that, how what happens is it helps us stay in line with everybody else. It takes away all the assumptions and so forth. The second thing is if you're managing multiple sites, create a project for each site or location, and then you can actually create a dashboard project to oversee all of it. If you have a task in Matrix, sometimes you actually have a task that itself is a Matrix, right? So you can actually just right click on that task and convert it into a project, and that allows you to actually convert that task into a project, and then you can jump into that project and have its own set of priorities. If you're following some specific training programs or you have a recurring initiatives, then make sure you create a project template. If you're a business owner, create a project for each of your departments, so then you have a very clear view on exactly what everyone's working on. And then if you're an individual contributor, create a project for your personal goals for your promotion request. That last feature I think is actually pretty useful, especially when it comes to trying to get a promotion or doing your performance review. One of the challenges I've seen over and over again is, people would go and when it comes to performance reviews, they have to, summarize the things that they've done. And guess what? It's so difficult because people don't have a good way to track all that work. But instead, with Matrix, you simply go into either the search view and then find all your work and then do the select all, generate your email report. You can take that email report, paste it into an AI, and it'll write the summary for you. And it's so powerful, and you're able to communicate to your manager exactly in all the work that you've done. And it's a perfect summary of the work that you have accomplished, and therefore you deserve that promotion. So I definitely want people to use that feature. And then so what to do now, make sure you sign up for Matrix. If you happen to use Teams and Outlook, make sure you install that. Matrix does not require Microsoft to use. You can use Matrix completely independently. We actually have native Mac application, native Windows application, web application, iOS, and so forth. Make sure you create a project for your top priorities. Make sure you set due dates and reminders. I do think that, if you don't use many features in Matrix, that's perfectly okay. Just make sure that you put the task into the appropriate quadrants and make sure you set those due dates. And then if you really want value out of your team, just ask your coworkers to also create their own Matrix, and then you sit down and compare notes with each other. And trust me, that simple exercise will give you so much alignment compared to anything that you do today. And then one other component is make sure you set 1 hour each week dedicated to reviewing your priorities. And I can't emphasize this enough because, all of us, we tend to be busy, right? All of us are busy. Every single one of us here today, I'm 100% sure, have a lot more work on their plate than the resources to do them. But what happens is that people tend to neglect that process of prioritization, the process of deciding what to work on. And so I strongly encourage you to spend at least 1 hour every week to reprioritize your work, just so then you have a sense of where you can have the biggest impact with your time. All right, that's all I have for you today. I hope that was useful. If you have any questions whatsoever, please share them in the chat right now. You can always send me an email at hi@affluence.com. Other than that, thank you so much for your time and attention. I appreciate it. I see the question here on, do we have integrations with Zoho? So actually with Matrix, we have a couple of integrations. Let me see if I can pull that up here. So these are the integrations that we have in the connectors page. We have Jira, Outlook, To-Do, Planner, Azure, Zoom, and so forth. But with Matrix, we also have Power Automate integration. So what that means is that you can actually integrate with Microsoft Power Automate, which then integrates with everything else. So that allows you to create an if this, then that environment. But the other thing you can do is actually you can install Matrix for Chrome, Edge, or Safari. And what's nice about this extension is that this extension is pretty much with you everywhere. So if you're on any web page, so for example, maybe you're in the Zoho CRM and you have a task, a customer there that you want to prioritize, simply click on the Chrome extension or the Edge extension, and you can create a task from that CRM page or URL and create the task and organize in the Matrix. And Matrix will take a screenshot, Matrix will link to it, and so forth. So it's a universal plugin that would let you integrate with anything. In fact, it's pretty useful too, because you can simply select any task on any website, simply right-click on it, and then choose Matrix, and then save this as a task in the system. And so Matrix lets you pretty much work with anything using that integration. Great. Thank you for that question. Again, thank you all for your time. If there's any other questions, feel free to reach out to me at hi@affluence.com. I hope this was helpful. Please share any feedback as well. Oh, I see another questions here. Questions on using Teams for file storage, communication, meetings. So actually, if you use a lot of Microsoft Teams, simply go to the in Teams itself, make sure that you install Matrix. That's the most obvious thing. But then the second thing is you can also install what's called the Matrix chatbot. So unfortunately, with Microsoft, you have to do multiple integrations. So you have to integrate, you have to add the Matrix for Outlook separately. Then you add Matrix as an app, right here on the bottom left. Then in the chat, simply click on this plus and then also add Matrix here as well. The moment you add Matrix there, then what happens is it actually integrates with your chat and your communication system. So it allows you to select any text here. So for example, let's say your coworker sends you a message. You can just click on it, hover over the ... and you can convert any conversation into a PM task. So that's actually a very useful way to turn a conversation into a task in Matrix. So it's really neat because my coworker and we have a conversation, and then we're talking about various things, and suddenly someone asks someone to do something. Well, guess what? I don't have to open Matrix, select a project, create a task, assign it, and so forth. I can just do it directly from the conversation itself. So that's one useful feature there. And then Matrix can also integrate into your calendar events in Microsoft Teams. So it helps you sort of build your agenda and so forth. So that's another way to do it. And so I have questions here on whether or not the Matrix integrates with the assignees' calendars. The answer is actually multiple ways. The first is that everyone has a calendar in Matrix, and also every project has a calendar as well. So the way you do calendar integrations in Matrix is the following. What happens is you can go to your calendar here. Let me see if I can pull this up. I believe you go back to here, you can go to a project. And when you go to a project, you can see how every project has a calendar. And so you actually get what's called a link to a calendar. And then you can actually attach that link. You subscribe to that calendar in Outlook. So it's not a two-way integration. It's a one-on-one integration. And I'm sorry, it's a one-way integration with the calendar. So what that allows you to do is see all the tasks you have in Matrix in your calendar, and then open up Matrix as needed. But you can't edit those calendar events in Outlook. Hopefully that was clear. Thank you all. I appreciate it and appreciate the questions. Let's see. Yes, the question is whether or not you can purchase for specific departments or team. Yes, you can. You don't have to license whole organizations. You can actually license exactly the number of users that you need. So you don't have to get the enterprise license at all. Great. Thank you all. I appreciate it again. Bye-bye.